Hello everyone, and welcome back for our second part in our workshop today. We will be presenting, or Shelley and Lisa will be presenting a workshop entitled Safe and Accepting Schools, High-Level EDI School Board Supports. So Lisa Cameron is the Ottawa Catholic School Board's Principal of Safe, Accepting, and Inclusive Schools. She has been in education for 23 years, including 3 years as a department head, 10 years as a high school vice principal, and is now in her 5th year as a high school principal. Lisa completed her Bachelor of Kinesiology at McMaster's University, her Bachelor's of Education at the University of Western Sydney, and her Master's in Education in the field of mental health at St. Francis Xavier University. Shelley has been a Superintendent of Education with the Ottawa Catholic School Board for 3 years, with responsibilities for the elementary student success, early years, literacy K-12, the virtual elementary school, and 2 family of schools. Shelley was a principal for 10 years at the elementary division and has worked for 2 different school boards. So now we'll give the virtual floor to Shelley and Lisa for their presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. As Olga just mentioned, my name is Shelley Montgomery and I'm a superintendent with the Ottawa Catholic School Board. And I should mention that I'm also a U Ottawa education grad. Thought I should share that. I am pleased to be joined here today by Lisa Cameron, who's brand new in her role as our Principal of Safe and Accepting and Inclusive Schools. Lisa is a wealth of information when it comes to all things safe schools, which includes suspension and expulsion. So as a board, we have not yet collected racialized student or staff data, and consequently, we cannot share any sort of specific data with you today. We do recognize, though, that the province has identified that suspensions and expulsion rates are higher amongst racialized youth, and that they have moved to remove the option of suspending students below grade 3. We applaud this. We really appreciated the theoretical perspective and legal perspective that Justice Zucker has just offered in another session. What we want to share with you today, though, is our lived experiences and high-level decisions and moves we have made that we feel will directly and indirectly lead to less suspensions and expulsion situations. Lisa will share a more detailed breakdown of suspension and expulsion processes, while I will share the many steps we have taken to be sure that all students and staff feel represented and seen in our system. So I'll pass it along to you now, Lisa.
Thank you, Shelley. Thumbs up, everybody can hear me okay? Yep, okay, perfect. So we'll go on to the first slide, please. And I'm just gonna say, this is my first year as the Safe Schools Principal. So I am still on a learning journey and it's been a big learning curve. I have been in high school settings for most of my career, but I was actually primary junior qualified first, and I have taught grade 4, and now I'm connecting with all the principals in the school board, so from K to 12, and often get phone calls throughout the day from elementary schools as well, and problem solving in supporting our students and their families. In terms of safe, inclusive, and accepting schools, I know you guys can read the slides yourselves. But and being in a Catholic school, we obviously, our bottom line is the dignity and respect for all students. And sometimes we're put in positions where a student maybe has done something, let's say making a bad choice, but at the forefront is making sure that those students are treated with respect throughout the process. And this really comes from PPM 119. Where to achieve an equitable and inclusive school climate, school boards and schools will strive to ensure that all members of the school community feel safe, comfortable, and accepted. We want all staff and students to value diversity and to demonstrate respect for others and a commitment to establishing a just, caring society. And that comes from the Equity Inclusion Education Strategy. So we will flip to the next slide. Obviously, a lot with the safe and accepting schools comes policies and procedures that school boards have to establish. And we definitely take a whole school approach, and there's a focus on mental health, digital citizenship, and keeping parents informed, especially right now where we are seeing a lot of things that happen outside of the school, especially with social media, and it comes back and has a direct impact on the school climate. But I do want to highlight the prevention and intervention strategies. I could go on for days about all of the things, and Shelley will touch on those. But just for example, we have Bullying Prevention and Awareness Week coming up, and we're working on a slide deck to support schools, both elementary and high school, LGBTQ2S+ groups, Youth Mental Health Week. We are currently in the OCSB Treaty Week, and we have a document that lists our days, weeks, and months of significance throughout the school year that school boards can talk about in terms of prevention and intervention strategies. So we do start with those strategies first before we get into other suspensions and expulsions. Okay, flipping to the next one. This is the Ontario Equity Plan. It was introduced in 2017 as a 3-year plan. From this plan, the fundamental principle is to work with every student an opportunity to succeed, regardless of ancestry, culture, ethnicity, gender identity, language, physical and intellectual ability, race, religion, sex orientation, social economic status, or any other factor. And I think that is the bottom line when it comes to equity. We do, and I will talk about this a little bit further, but we do have an intervention program with the Ottawa Catholic School Board. It's called OCSB, Ottawa Catholic Intervention Program, and it's committed to supporting students deemed at high risk at graduation, reaching their end goals by ensuring a safe learning environment, which includes a variety of essential and professional supports. So the next one, so I just sort of went through when we have a suspension and it's entered into a database, and this data is collected by the ministry. This is just a snapshot of some of the suspendable offenses. And I highlighted conduct injurious to the moral tone of the school, conduct injurious to the moral, to the well-being of others. And I highlighted it because it's a broader term, and it doesn't label or pigeonhole a student. And often when you're talking to a parent and it's a first suspension, we want to have those broader terms instead of labeling the student. So I have found over my 10-15 years in suspendable behaviors, most administrators often use these ones to start with, and then there's a side note. But I mean, like, if you look at this list, some of them we never use. So for example, medical immunization. Public health will send us a list of students who are not immunized and say that we have to suspend them. Well, we know in a regular school that's ridiculous. We want our kids to come to school. So we are working with the families and giving them the information so that their child can get immunized, or if they need to produce paperwork to public health so that they are exempt from immunizations, however that works out. But like I said, some of these, another one that used to be a drop-down menu was dress code. Well, we don't want to suspend students for dress code. And so things have evolved. And so although there may be things in a drop-down menu like medical immunization, that is not something that we would use in a school. And I don't know any school that would use that. So although they can't, with that. So if they have, so when we just work with the families, we don't mark them as suspended. The public health gives us a hard date, and the student may be outside of school in terms of getting their immunization, and we try to set that up, but we don't, there has never been a piece of paperwork that says a student is suspended. The family usually withdraws them and then gets their immunizations done, or a letter. And we can talk about these. As we said earlier, there are no suspensions from JK to grade 3. And then there are a list of suspendable offenses from grades 4 to 12. We chunk suspensions in terms of days. So 1 to 5 days is a pretty heavy suspension. And the school it's their obligation to provide a homework and work package. I will say one of the things that has come out of COVID, our school board works on HAPARA, and schoolwork is available in real time to students who are not at school, let's say for serving a 1 to 5 day suspension. So they are provided with homework at home. The 6 to 10 day suspension, we offer an academic program. And so I am at a school, which I said earlier, and I'm going to get into this in the next couple of slides, but a program where they are offered academic support. And in the 11 to 20 day suspension, which could lead to an expulsion, we offer academic and non-academic support. So that could be things like anger management, substance abuse counseling, life coaching, anything like that. So at OCSB, we do provide, like I said, the ministry says academic support for 6 to 10 days, but in our board in high school, we offer both academic and non-academic for the 6 to 10 day suspensions as well at my program. So parents, anything after within a 6 to 20 day suspension, parents are offered this program, and I will talk about it a little bit later. Okay, next one. This is the next slide. These expulsion behaviors come directly from the ministry reasons for an expulsion. So possession of a firearm, using a weapon to cause bodily harm, committing physical assault, trafficking in weapons or illegal drugs, committing robbery, giving alcohol to a minor, or cannabis, bullying. And again, we already said this earlier, bullying is such a wide range. And often it's bullying that could be happening on social media. And oftentimes it's very hard to find out who's actually involved. So this is coming from the ministry. And when an expulsion happens, and there could be many different presentations on all of this, but a principal has to begin a principal's investigation. So if a student is on a 20-day suspension pending expulsion to start, a principal has to complete an investigation within the first 10 days of the expulsion. And then they will have choices to make. They can reduce the suspension. They can call it a 20-day suspension. They can go forward with an expulsion. But there's a time limit on when the principal has to have that done. So the word expulsion, I really wish, you can change it to the next slide, please. I really wish, personally, I wish that the word expulsion was a different word, to be honest. But when reaching a decision, I'm finding in my role that we are working with the families on making these decisions as well. So the principal, the family, I will say also, we are seeing an increase in advocates for students. I know it was talked about earlier that students with different languages and maybe being a language barrier, we have multicultural liaison officers that we can call on, and they will come to our meetings and act as somebody who can speak to the language and make sure that the parent understands. By no means would we want a parent signing off on anything without them fully understanding. And when the advocates come, we welcome them. We're all on the same page, and we are all trying to find out what's the best path for a student. So for example, reaching a decision, prior to reaching a decision, the principal does have to have the voice of the student. So that is part of the principal investigation. So if the student is 18 or has withdrawn from parent authority, they can come on their own. We do suggest that they come with somebody regardless. We meet with witnesses to obtain statements. As mentioned earlier, we always review and have to review the student's student record, Ontario student record, consider the student's IEP if there is any, review any progressive discipline to date, other mitigating factors, if any, and we always consult with the superintendent of schools. Next slide. More mitigating factors. Does the student have the ability to control his or her behavior? Does the student have the ability to understand the foreseeable consequences of that behavior? The student's continuing presence in a school does not create an unacceptable risk or safety to any person. We need to consider each mitigating factor and determine that none of them impact the outcome, and determine that none of them impact the outcome of the principal's investigation. So we have to consider them before the outcome. Other factors. The next one. So we have to talk about the student's history. There may be a case conference involved, whether progressive discipline has been used, whether the activity for the student is suspended or expelled was related to any harassment of the student due to their race, ethnicity, origin, religion. So it goes through all of the equity pieces on about the student, how the suspension or expulsion would affect the student's ongoing education, the age of the student. And then it goes through all of those other factors so these come directly from our principal's investigation, and it directs the principal to make sure that they are going through all of that before making a decision. And I know that ultimately it's the principal's decision, but really it's a team approach between, oftentimes if a student has a clinician at the school, we do have social workers and psychologists attached to every school in our school board. In my program, for kids who are on lengthy suspensions or expulsions, we have a psychologist and a social in our building physically 24/7 a day for those students. Okay, we'll flip to the next page. So this is the program that we offer our students. It is every school board would have a program like this. Ours is called OCSB, and it's a combination of the academic and the counseling piece. So any student from grades 7 to 12 who's been suspended for 6 or more days is offered this program. Some families choose not to, but we will encourage them to come to the program. So it's because it's not mandatory. If a student is expelled, then the program is mandatory. And this is why I don't like the word expelled, because the student really doesn't leave our school board. Although the ministry has written words like expulsion from the school board, if they are expelled from the school board, they come to OCSB, they continue their schoolwork, they work on credits, they work with clinicians. When they have successfully completed the program, they get integrated back into one of our schools in our school board. And I think that that's a really big misconception, that where these students are not being integrated. And we work closely with our coterminous boards. Some families might say, well, this school board is closer. So I'm on the phone with like the public, the French, like all the different school boards, and we decide what would be the best when the time comes for that student to re-enter back into a school. And sometimes the students don't want to. Sometimes the students really, they become part of the school, and there's other students working on things, and they say, I don't want to go back, depending on their age. If they're close to graduation, they might say, no, I don't want to go back to a regular school. I would prefer to stay here. And then we would offer that to the student if that's what they had chosen with their family and it's the best fit for them. We'll flip to the next one. So So our goals are to ensure that they receive academic and non-academic support to help the students remain with their current studies. So if they're in a shorter suspension, we have a teacher who works with the home school teacher, and they would go get work back and forth. So let's say, for example, a student was on a 10-day suspension. The teacher from the OCSB program would be emailing and working with the teacher at the school that they've been sent from, and they would continue to work on their studies while receiving clinician support in the program. And then when the student finishes their suspension, so not an expulsion, but a suspension, and they're going back to their home school, our clinician teacher would do a re-entry back into the school. So we would talk about with the student, with their parents, with the home school, and the clinician would go through everything that they've worked on, what the student has said that they're worried about when they come back to school. We work as a liaison for the school so that they can set them up for success when they return back to school. We don't just send them back. We make sure that there is an entry plan in place before they return to their home school. Or if it's an expulsion and they finish the program, we have a re-entry plan for that student into one of our other schools to make sure that they're set up for support. We definitely provide community support services. Sometimes students come to us and they are already seeing a clinician in the community. So we don't want to double dip on that, but often our clinicians will release an exchange of information will happen, and the clinicians will speak on what best we could do to support that student before coming back to school. When a student does come to us, we do an intake meeting. So we would invite parents, the administration from the school, the clinicians. It's a very much a wraparound effect. We often will have the student go and look at the physical classroom, and it gives us an opportunity to have a private conversation with the parents on what they see in their role in supporting their child. And the school will also provide us with, we call it a SAP, a student action plan, and that gives us goals for the student, and not just on behavior, but it could be academic goals, it could be things that they want to work on. And we have those counselors that are experts in, let's say, substance abuse or anger management. So those are things that we can talk about on the student action plan when the students are coming to the program. Okay, next. The benefits, in the short time that I've been at the program, I have seen huge benefits. There's definitely accountability and self-discipline. It's a structured environment which kids like. We feed everybody, which they also love, and it's a sense of community. So we don't focus on the why they were there. And these students are not, they are supervised, and it can be a shortened day because depending on where they're coming from. Our school is centrally located, but we could have students coming from as far as Stittsville and Orleans coming to the program. So we try to have a school start and end time that can facilitate the transportation back and forth. There's a low student teacher ratio. We get referrals from outside agencies. If a student is working, let's say something with Ottawa Police or diversion, and they have a probation officer, they will often come to the school and meet in a private room. The students really like that because it's away from their home. And like I said, we don't focus on the why that they're there. So we do try to keep the kids supervised because, you know, when the kids are there, why are you here? Why are you here? We're not focusing on the behavior, we're focusing on the supports and giving them the tools, we say in their toolbox or their backpack, so that they can go back to a community school. So in this program, it is offered for our expelled students, like I said. So a student may be expelled for 20 days with a suspension for 20 days. If the Board of Trustees does warrant an expulsion, then they remain in our program and would, like I said earlier, participate in what we call a Safe Schools transfer. So although the word expulsion from the school board, like I said earlier, it sounds terrible, but they are still students in our school board, and we work with the families. It's unfortunate that those are the words we use, because if I could have parents who felt comfortable talking to people and who have gone through this process, many are feeling supported and they understand that their child will be going back to a school, and we've given them the one-on-one support and the clinical support that they need to be successful at school. So does anybody have any questions for me? I seem to look in the chat. If anybody wants to ask a question. I mean, there's so many, the portfolio of Safe Schools, just so you know, it's very vast. I also visit, we have a St. John Bosco Achievement Center, and it is connected to U-Turn and Operation Come Home. So it's students who are living in shelters, living on, not living with families and no guardian. And we have a teacher on site at this community-based resource. And it's a teacher from our school board. We also have a teacher at St. Mary's Home who is supporting young mothers who who aren't in a regular school. Also facilitate the Algonquin Achievement Center, where students are earning dual credits for whatever reason, for many different reasons. High school is not the place for them, and they have fit the criteria to move to the Algonquin Achievement Center. So even in my role, I find I am moving around and being able to really visit these schools where we have our most at-risk students and finding out ways that we can support them.
I think we have a question by Session, if you wanted to unmute your mic.
Hi, I think so. Yeah, I had a question on a previous slide when you were describing the process that takes place when a suspension is occurring. I think it said that there's an investigation that's done, and one of the things that's looked at is whether there was harassment of the student based on a number of different factors, race, ethnicity, etc. So I was wondering, like, how is that determined, and what's, if you can think of an example of where that may have occurred and that might be a mitigating factor in the student being suspended or not?
Thank you. So I'm going to speak more as a principal than a safe schools principal, because I haven't had, like, I've been doing the job since September, so I haven't had anything come across this year. I think as a principal who's doing the principal's investigation, I think that in speaking, it's that trust, right? You have to be, it's that relationship piece, because you might not know. And it's sort of how will you come to the conclusion that this is happening to that child? So often it's maybe through a guidance counselor. If the student is involved in anything in the school, like the equity team or the Black Student Association, you might be able to tap into those resources, a trusted ally. And Shelley will talk a bit more about our equity advisor that we have here at the school board. And being new to the position, I have gone to him and said, like, these kids have lived experiences that I cannot connect to. And so we're relying on these people that are now, here at the school board that we can rely on to help us navigate this. So I don't know if there's I can't think of anything specifically, but I think at the forefront, that has to always be a mitigating factor for sure. I don't know if that was really an answer. I don't know if anything that's like, I guess the thing is when that happens, regardless of what the suspendable offense, it might sway the principal's decision. It might decide to reduce the suspension or expunge it altogether.
Okay.
Which can happen and has happened. I've started principal's investigations and working with the family and what's the best for the person. And at the end, it's no expulsion, and or sometimes like moving the suspension from one day to another. You definitely want as many people's input as you can and investigating as many people as you can about the situation. So these case studies, and I know we are going to do a Padlet. I'll read through the first one. I have 3 of them, and some of them are not from our board. Some of them have been experiences over the last few years. I'm working with some vice principals right now who I've asked them sort of to put some things together on what would be something that, and these are a bit higher end cases, to be honest. The second one, definitely seeing more and more in elementary schools. So just looking for, there's no right or wrong answer, but in this case study, a grade 8 student has an IEP and is diagnosed with ADHD and ODD. After a sustained period of argumentative behavior and non-compliance, he escalates to swearing and uttering repeated verbal threats to the principal. The resource teacher and EA attempt to redirect his behavior but are unsuccessful. The current suspension is at 10 days in length. There have been previous suspensions for assault and non-compliance. He has had several interventions historically and has attended a care and treatment program for similar behavior and concerns in primary grades. So for you to know, care and treatment plan would be something that like a clinician would apply for on behalf of the school. And it's a joint school between the 2 public and Catholic school board, where it's intense training, and it often goes for a whole school year before they are reintegrated back into the home school. The student has been prescribed 2 different medications for ADHD and ODD, but has stopped taking them. The school board's ABA lead has been involved with the student for many years, but the current strategies are not helping the student be successful at school. He continues to be both unengaged in learning and participating safely in the school environment. The student shows no remorse for his behavior. I did say, so I guess, and I'm not even saying that the student ended up getting a 10-day suspension, but the question is, what process would you go through? And it sounds to me like you guys have been working on sort of a framework. So what would it warrant a 10-day suspension? But I think the bigger part is how would you support the student and their family? So I don't know. Yep.
I'm gonna jump in. I threw the Jamboard in the chat box, and if you've never used one before, once you open it up and you scroll down, there's a little, like, I don't know, it looks like a little leaf, and it says sticky note. So you can just type in your comment on the sticky note, and everyone's comments will show up on the Jamboard. So just wanted to mention that, Lisa. And we'll be doing that for all 3 case studies.
We do have 3 of them, so we'll take a few questions or comments for this, and then we can move on to. People are welcome to raise their hands too, or just speak up. Let me grab my glasses. Asking student, yeah. So yes, absolutely. In any case, you want to obviously involve the student. This is a grade 8 student who, and I will say who has exactly student voice. This student is in grade 8 and can make decisions and can articulate and advocate for themselves. So, and if they can't, then there should be somebody who can for them in this process. So for example, another case we had this year, a student was returning back to the school. They liked coming to the OCSB program because it was a bit of a later start. So for that student in their re-entry back to the school, what's going to help them be successful? Well, they have flat out said that, you know, if I didn't have to be there at 8 a.m., then maybe going in at 9:30. And this particular person was dropping off their younger kids at elementary school and could drop off their older child on the way to school. So it's sort of thinking outside the box on having that student be successful for the amount of time that they're there and what works for them. What works for them. Speak with the family. Yes, exactly. And this is a different scenario, but I have been working with another family when we're talking about the medication, and a lot of it is to do with COVID. These kids have been home and they are having a hard time self-regulating when they're back to school and or have stopped taking medication. So students too that have been successful at school, I'm finding right now that's what the schools are focusing on, is working with those kids so that they can, you know, start self-regulating and talking about that. Yeah, and that's, you know what, this person here, has anyone ever tried seriously conversation with a kid? Exactly, I'm with you. And with ODD. And so oftentimes, I had a family at my school a few years ago as principal, and we were not going with either a very big or a suspension at all for a student who was ODD, and we had lots of clinicians involved with the student. But the parents were asking for the student to go to the program because that they knew that they could get more intense one-on-one and everyday work with a clinician and one-on-one with the teacher. So they were actually producing, although the day was shortened, they were producing more schoolwork at our program. So we're often thinking outside the box to help those students. Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, I wasn't directly involved with this student, but it's to find out when somebody comes, if he's obviously the ABA lead from the school board has been involved. So they would be in the classroom as well with the parents' permission, watching the student, watching the class and how things are set up so that he could, or that a student could be successful. Yeah, you know, and medication, kids are that's also just a hot topic. I mean, at no time can a parent or a school tell a student that they need to be on medication. And if they are on medication and they're growing, there's a whole, you know, other aspect to what is working and what's not working. And my heart, when I meet with parents and they are trying to figure out medications, it can be very, very draining, very emotional to see their child having to take those medications and making decisions what's right for their family. And that's definitely something to keep on. What time? I think let's move on to the next case study. So a teacher notices a male student in her grade 8 class has become unusually quiet during class and that the student has recently been involved in disagreements on the schoolyard with other boys. One of the student's friends finally disclosed to the teacher that a large group of boys had been repeatedly calling the student homophobic slurs at recess. The teacher reports the incident to the principal. When the boy speaks to the principal, he is very embarrassed and indicates it has happened for over a year. The student finds out that the boy does in fact identify as 2SLGTBQ+ and hasn't been reporting the incidents. What are the best steps to take to support the student? What steps do you take to address the repeated homophobic slurs? And what steps can you take to help change the school culture? So although there may or may not be a punitive suspension or consequence, this is a case where it still falls under safe schools and there's still action that needs to be taken. So maybe, I know you're going to move the Jamboard back to the slide would be helpful so I can see. Thanks. So just, this is, you know, what would be something that you would do if you were part of this school. So best steps to support the student, to address the repeated homophobic slurs, and steps that can be taken to change the school culture.
And just to specify, there's a second Jamboard link in the chat for this case study.
I will say too, the reality is often students would identify, you know, in the 2S LGBTQ+, they would identify more in high school, and this is not the case anymore. And this is why elementary schools have to be prepared. Make a note during the teachers' meeting to pay more attention to the boy. Yeah. So raising awareness to who is involved, to the staff members. Talk to the boys who are involved, promoting a more safe, inclusive culture. Yeah. Ensuring that teachers are setting an inclusive tone in their classrooms. And a lot of our schools are forming different groups and kids where kids can come and feel supported and or support their friends. What about the school culture? So I know with Anti-Bullying Week coming up for us, I'm currently working on a slide deck, and some of the stuff for elementary includes books about race or about students who identify as transgender or anything else. So it's to bring that education piece into the school as well. And so that is happening in our schools now, but I've just been recently given a list of books that that were recommended through our school board, and so we'll be looking at more of that. Safe spots. Yes, a safe spot. Yeah, sure.
In this case, with the bullies, oh, sorry, the audio is messed up. In this case, would the bullies not be like reprimanded in some way?
Yes, so I think that's, and yeah, and that can range, because that could range anything like, do they understand what they did? Again, the mitigating factors. Do they have remorse? Are they going to even own up to saying those things? So that's the principal's job, to start that investigation and talk to the students. And there may be that kind of consequence. There's a slide later on that at the end of the case studies, I have an article that is from 2018, but it's a school board in Waterloo, and schools are looking at more restorative practices. And we have a lot of schools who have teachers and staff trained in restorative practices, and there may be something that could be a suspension, and on top of that, something that's restorative. It depends on what comes forward. And I mean, if this has been going on and repeated, then that also falls under the bullying definition, right? So again, and depending on the age of the student, this is a grade 6 class, so students can be suspended. But it's to work with the families and the staff, and definitely creating that school culture around safe schools.
I think like for school culture, a Gay Straight Alliance could help.
Yes, and that's what we're seeing in our schools, and our staff are now meeting with our mental health lead on how to successfully start those groups in our schools, and many of our schools already have them. And I would say, like before, years ago, it might have just been in high school, and now we are seeing these groups formed in elementary, which is amazing. Okay, I don't know, do we have time for that? I know, Shelley, you have about 35 minutes and we're at the 45-minute mark. I don't need to do case study number 3, and I could just take any questions that anybody has for me about my role and how I'm supporting schools and principals. We don't have to do case study 3 because I don't want to take up too much more of your time.
Lisa, maybe you could just read it and just give a quick highlight of your thoughts on it. But I won't put the Jamboard in.
Okay. So police contacted administration about the school about an incident involving a grade 6 student that occurred in the community. The student was involved in pushing younger students who attend the same school in the park the previous day on their walk home from school. The student took off the shoes of a couple younger students and went through their school bags. She searched their personal belongings and took them from them. In an altercation, one of these students in particular, she threatened one student in grade 5 by holding a knife to his face while on the ground as he refused to give over his belongings. The following day, Once the police notified the principal of the school, the VP and principal questioned the grade 6 student. It was then discovered that she had 2 knives in her possession during her questioning period. The student also admitted to making threats to the younger student with a knife and stealing from various students. Her actions were confirmed by other students and several other witnesses. Some of the victims claim that they were targeted because of their race, although the offender denies this wholeheartedly. The student and parents are accepting of the suspension and collaborate with the school administration. This is the first incident that has come known to the school, although it has been shared that multiple thefts have occurred in the community. How does this affect the school climate and school community? Given the age of the student, what supports would you put in place, and what restorative practices could the school implement? So this is a young student. Obviously, this is a crime that has been committed into the community. Regardless of this case study, what we find is that if a student is involved in something criminal, so for example, and I've had this experience on the weekend, and has assaulted somebody at a party, but they've come into the school and those students are at the school, it does affect the climate of the school. And oftentimes, whether there's a suspension or not, police will step in, and if the family chooses to have a student charged for something, there could be conditions that a school is unable to, they're just told the schools there's conditions, and this student is going to need a safe schools transfer to another school because they can't be together in a school. And that has happened. I will say in a case where there is police involvement, we do parallel investigations. And if there is a police investigation, the school is not allowed, and it does not investigate until the police are done, and then the school can do their own investigation. And often, I know we don't have our school police resource program in our schools anymore, and I could talk about that for a long time, but we now have what is called an NRT, a neighborhood resource team, and they work with the schools. And I know that there's lots of stories out there. My experience has always been that if the school can help the student and the family, the police are there as a support. It's unfortunately, the older they get and things happen in the community, we're not able to necessarily support those students because of their age, but we definitely work with the Ottawa Police so that we serve these kids and their families, and that this is not something that's permanently on their record. So, and I like the restorative practices is huge. And if you just want to go to my last slide, there was, so this is keeping kids in school. So this is in Waterloo, but it is talking about, and we do a lot of in-school suspensions. It's not a formal suspension, and it's where a student can often meet with their guidance counselor, meet with their vice principal, talk about what happened so that they can have a successful re-entry back into the classroom. And sometimes parents say if they have a young child and they're being sent home, they don't have anybody to look after them, right? So if they don't have any childcare, no, I was not in Waterloo, but this is an older article, but I just know that school boards are talking about these restorative practices and other means of consequences instead of a punitive consequence. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa, and for putting all of that together and sharing a very practical approach to suspension and expulsions and all the different alternative programs we have for students that are in this situation, or families. It's not just the student, it's the family. So thank you very much. So as mentioned earlier, though our school board does not have cultural identity data yet, we do recognize that across the province, there is data directly related to race and suspension and expulsions in the province of Ontario. Simply because we do not have the data, though, we would never assume that our school board is not included in this overall picture, and recognize that we have some work to do to be sure that our students feel safe and represented in our system. And I know that Justice Zucker spoke about this quite a bit. So we are fully committed to this. So what we have here on this slide are the strategic commitments that our board proudly uses to support all things student success for our students and staff. These commitments have been extremely well received by our 5,000 employees and our 45,000 students, and even across Eastern Ontario, people have addressed our commitments. So, however, though the language of be community, be well, and be innovative is catchy and influential, we recognize that that it is not the language of the commitments alone that will make a difference, but the actual tangible commitments. So some examples will be included in the next slides. So next slide, please. And I should note that I have kind of two screens going on here. So if you put any questions in the chat box, someone will have to point it out for me because I can't see that now. So firstly, in order to move forward on actionable items, we had to create a 3-year plan to keep us on track and accountable. So we were grateful to the Board of Trustees who passed the OCSB Equity Framework on June 25th, 2019. It has really allowed us to stay focused and give us something to monitor, reflect, and celebrate. We aligned our framework with the 3 equity pillars of the Ministry of Education, which Lisa mentioned earlier. So those 3 pillars are leadership and human resources, organizational structures, and accountability, and school and classroom practice. I'm going to speak to each of those. So in general, as a board, we really have to review the systemic barriers we may unconsciously be creating. We have been leaning in and having those conversations fiercely. It is our hope that though these actions in our school board and similar actions across all school boards in Ontario, that this will naturally reduce the reduction of suspensions in early elementary grades and all grades. I will walk you through the different elements of this framework. So if we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So one of the commitments we made under the pillar of classroom and instruction is in Canada, as we all know, the month of February is dedicated to Black History Month. Our school board has adopted the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent. As a school board, we are committed to build into our curriculum the history of Black people in Canada. This declaration and actionable items were all developed with the Black community and with the notion that nothing about us without us. So similar to what Justice Zucker mentioned earlier, but just worded in a different way. So nothing about us without us, that is how we have created anything to do with equity. Recognizing that I'm a white woman, I cannot have the same lived experiences and create decisions for people if I don't have those lived experiences. There's always been focus groups of people involved in all of these initiatives that I will be speaking about. So the logo that you see there was developed very intentionally. Each school received this poster and signage, and it was an intentional decision. At the school board meeting that this declaration was passed, the board immediately added an additional motion, which is very rare for our board, for the Ottawa Catholic Board. We don't really suddenly add motions at a meeting, but this motion that passed was that each school immediately received this declaration in a framed format. So it wasn't just something that was, said at a board meeting, that they received it. And so that school year, the board also dedicated significant funds so that each school could purchase new toys, for example, books, paintings, murals, so that all the students could feel represented. So if Alpha, if you can open that link, I'm going to quickly, again, I can't see, oh, is it not letting you give you, I don't have access that way. So what I'll do is I'm going to read to you. So there's 2 pages to our declaration. You can go back over, I'll just talk to it then, sorry. So essentially, we have 2 pages. Initially, when we created our declaration, we had the declaration with all the fancy words like recalling and recognizing, we hereby declare, and all of that sort of thing. But as we went through the actual focus groups and we met with different groups in the Black community of Ottawa, they were really telling us that we needed to actually, have tangible commitments included in this. So the tangible commitments are all on page 2 of our declaration, and you can find that on our website. So I'm not sure why it was saying no access, but so I'll read to you a couple of the commitments here. Commit to incorporating the histories of people of African descent from kindergarten to grade 12, beginning but not limited to religion, language arts, social sciences, and humanities. We commit to incorporating an equity walk in in all working and learning environments by December 20th, 2019, with the purpose of building greater recognition and awareness in our symbols, structures, and environments. We commit to increasing representation of diverse employees and leaders in a board and providing professional learning and diversity and anti-bias training for staff. We commit to embedding equity and diversity professional learning with our new teacher induction program, which many of you hopefully will be in the next year or so. We commit to establishing a subcommittee in May 2019. So again, this was passed a while back now. And we commit to continuing to explore ways in which the Ottawa Catholic School Board can honor and support our diverse and vibrant community. So, so just wanted to share with you some of the tangible commitments we have made, and we have moved forward quite significantly in a lot of these. So I'll go to the next slide. Thank you. I am just changing my own slide here. So another proud decision that we feel we made that might reduce in the long run some suspension and expulsions, we made as a board where we feel will have impact has been on our student engagement and inclusive education was the move we made to change to NBE 3C and 3U courses. So what does this mean? So this means English literature taught through the lens of Indigenous voice versus, let's say, Shakespeare yet again. So in 2021, all high schools had to offer the course. And by this school year, as you see on this slide here, it is the only English course offered in grade 11, thus making it a mandatory course for all grade 11 students. Since we are presenting for a university, you should know that this course qualifies as a prerequisite for grade 12 English, which is significant when students are applying to university. So the rollout has gone well, but it has been a lot of work. Some feedback from other boards who had gone in this direction before us is that we needed to take our time for everyone, teachers, principals, and parents. Teachers were nervous that they might say the wrong things, for example. Some principals were nervous that parents, and not actually the students, they're worried about the parents, would miss Shakespeare and insist that we be teaching Shakespeare again in grade 11. So moving forward slowly, we took the time to ensure that our teachers felt more confident with the material. So this year, actually, this past year, we hired a full-time dedicated Indigenous study consultant to support this work. We already have Indigenous consultants at the board, but this person is just dedicated to supporting this work here. So overall, this was well received in the end, and we received some positive media coverage about this. So we'll go to the next slide. So over a 4-year period, we went from having a few high schools offering this course to now all high schools, as I mentioned, offering it. And we have, as you saw in the other slide, we took a lot of steps to make sure that we rolled this out well. We've read a lot of books. We had elders support us in all of this. And so in order to, we wanted to make sure we had impact with this. So this video is a video that we created to demonstrate the positive impact by offering this course on our students. So if you don't mind playing the video, that would be great.
That's exactly what the point of this class is to get people who have these life stories, who have lived this, and people who haven't. It's like people like me, an Inuit person, who have firsthand experience of these things. It's taking that and combining it with people like you who don't have the same experiences as me and putting both of them together to find a overall solution, overall outcome, and a way to both understand it equally.
I think that it was definitely a cooperative learning experience. I think that a lot of the important stuff that I learned about myself and about my own maybe shortcomings or my own preconceived notions, I learned that through in-class discussions where I was taught by other people like Adamina who had different experiences than I had, and then also through in-class learning where we were talking about, okay, well, this is the actual history and these are the hard facts. I think it makes it much easier to examine your own areas of ignorance and then say, well, how can I improve myself and how can I be an ally to people in the kind of space of reconciliation and all that.
You really learn more about Canada's history, and you learn the importance of the Indigenous and the land that we stay on And it's not like in history where you learn more about the treaties, but you learn about the meaning behind the treaties and the values that they really hold, and not just, oh, this was a treaty that was there.
I liked how the novels Seven Fallen Feathers and Indian Horse really were able to show me why things are and what happened in the past, and as well their issues that are a lot closer to home. Well, this course really inspired me to learn more about my roots and my culture, and as a result, I went and got my status card. So.
I also really enjoy the fact that we have a lot of in-person guest speakers. So I find it a lot easier to understand the way that they have their beliefs and their personal perspectives on life. And I think it just provides students with a much better appreciation towards the culture itself.
This course develops global citizens because it helps students to recognize their unconscious biases. It helps them to see how language influences value systems and how perspectives influence reality. So students learn really important skills to help them to collaborate in both locally and globally, to work with people who maybe have a different lived experience than their own. It's important as Canadians that we learn Canadian history, and most importantly, we need to learn about how Inuit, First Nations, and Métis experiences are a huge part of Canada's history.
So thanks, Olga. So just to address one of the questions, so is this only in Ottawa? It is a course that's offered everywhere in Ontario, but it's not, there's not many boards that have made it mandatory. So the high school can offer it, and if they don't have enough students sign up for it in grade 11, then they will not move forward with the course. So what we've done is made it the only option. So the other English course is not offered, if that makes sense. So yes, it's offered across the province. It's a course that a code, an NBE, but it's not necessarily mandatory. So we're happy that we've made it mandatory. So we'll go to the next slide. So the next slide here is around another pillar, which is structures and accountability. Are we on? Just wait. There we go. So because we're a Catholic school board, there is a misconception that we are not inclusive to students who identify with LGBTQ community. And this is simply not true. So we're working hard to change this perception. We recognize that there is a need to support our staff with the proper resources and language to be able to support these students. Consequently, we developed this highly used document that you see here in front of you. A number of people were key in the development of this document. People who identify in this community, mental health leads, union reps, principals, even priests. Our principals, guidance staff, and chaplains were hungry for this document and relieved when it was released so that they can better support these students. Though we didn't have to as a school board, this document was also shared with the Archbishop in Ottawa out of respect, and he gave us his blessing through the lens of mental health. So as a Catholic school, we understand the balance of gender identity from a Catholic lens, from the human rights perspective, and from the Education Act. We are bound by all three of those pillars. And I think we're doing that very well right now. So now as we've been rolling out this doc, we've been providing professional development. And most of this time, this professional development has been delivered by our mental health lead and in collaboration with our faith animator, who happens to be a priest. So as I mentioned, we're working hard to change the perception that Catholic school boards to support the LGBTQ community. And you should know that we had a flag policy in our school board where only the Canadian flag could be flown outside our schools. It was literally in our policy. You may have seen in the media, just this past June, that we amended our policy, and the only other flag that can be flown outside of our schools now is the flag in June. Each school has received a flag, and we're even putting new flagpoles. It sounds like a silly logistics, but it's huge. But our current flagpoles, because they can only fly one flag, so we've had to put up new flagpoles so that they can fly two flags. So I believe this action, though symbolic, was significant in ensuring that we show that we care about all of our students in our building, and we do all that we can to be sure that students feel included and represented. So I will go to the next slide. So another under the organizational and structures pillar you will see a list of items here that were very intentionally planned in order to support our equity framework and our declaration. We are working hard to close gaps for all of those who are marginalized and working to celebrate the diversity of all students. Most importantly, we are trying to be sure that all staff have PD to understand the why this equity work is so important. So I will walk you through some of these items that are listed here on this slide. I'll just bringing down. So Christian Community Day is a day that we have at the Shaw Center where all of our 5,000 employees, everyone from teachers to custodians to all jobs in between, social workers, psychologists, all come to that day. It's a huge day, very well planned. Essentially, it's a battle to determine what is going to be the topic of that day. It's always a community building activity day. However, last year, well, I guess before the pandemic, the year before, it was all around equity. So that was a big piece. We were able to share a central message to all the board. We had Black History Board-wide events for the first time in the last 2 years. For the first time in the last 2 years, we're offering LGBTQ professional development for teachers. They get signed up right away. A lot of teachers sign up for it. As I mentioned, additional funding, like hundreds of thousands of dollars to support resources in terms of equity. We align all of this work all through the lens of mental health with our mental health lead and that team. Again, dedicated professional activity days for equity. And we have revamped our entire equity policy, and that was just passed in May of 2021, or yes, last year. So these are just some of the organizational instructional pieces that I thought I would mention. So the next slide, please. So another pillar is leadership and human resources. So we've been busy trying to stay committed to the work we are doing in our leadership and HR pillar. Everything that you see listed on this slide has happened. And I will walk you through these again. So I'm just going to go down the list here. So we have hired a dedicated equity and diversity advisor, as Lisa mentioned. Directors Conference is a conference every year where all of our principals attend, and we have made the entire conference through around the equity lens and professional development for almost 2 straight days for our principals. We have done, this was huge actually, and I'm going to speak to it a little bit more. We did bias-free interview training for all principals and vice principals. It was mandatory for superintendents like myself, managers, everywhere. Essentially, anyone in our board has to have gone through this bias-free interview training. Huge. We created a Black Educator network. So I'm going to give an example of how this has helped increase representation in our building. So not just for our students, but in our staff. That's the key piece here. So our Black Educator network was championed by one of our teachers, and we fully supported him on this. And I'll give an example where last year we had a teacher teaching French in our virtual program, and she was significantly struggling. She was also a fairly newcomer to Canada. And all the things we put in place to try and support her were not successful, I would say, for her. And at the end of the day, we linked her with our Black Educator network. We have mentors who have offered and volunteered to be mentors. And this was hugely successful. She could relate and work better with this mentor from the Black Educator network. So there's been, we're very grateful for that network, and we're able to use this to support representation and increase representation in our school board. We've also hosted recruiting events that were specifically targeted at racialized candidates. We've hired a Black grad coach through some ministry funding, but we've also put some of our own board money towards this. We have a second one, I think the ad went out just recently. And then we also are hiring a mental health and culturally sensitive coach just for this year. And this is to help support re-engagement after the pandemic. So huge pieces we've done through our human resources department to try and increase representation in our buildings. And in our school. So I'll go to the next slide. So I'm just going to spend a little bit more time just quickly on our interview bias-free training. So some of the outcomes here is that we wanted our principals in particular, who do all the hiring for our teachers, to understand the importance of a diverse and inclusive workforce, identify unconscious bias and ways to challenge bias. So we've done lots of workshops on unconscious bias, and identify concrete hiring practices that are bias-free. So these were huge goals for this. And so, for example, this year we have a whole bunch of new principals that have started. It's mandatory that they go through this training. So yeah, and I'll go to the next slide, please. So this slide is around classroom and curriculum, that pillar, which is probably one of the most important for yourselves. But we offered staff-wide PD, which is culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, on many PD days. The PD, like as I mentioned, they're like gold PD professional development days, because you do not need to provide release time for teachers, which is really expensive. So when it was approved that that CRRP was part of our system-wide PD day, all those involved were extremely excited to know that the same language about this important topic was being heard across the entire system. We also make this mandatory for NTIP session. And so there's actually 3 mandatory sessions just on CRRP for NTIP teachers. So I just want to give an example of a paragraph that, a common message that was sent to all of our teachers across the board. So I'm just going to read a paragraph that was recently said to our teachers. So in a diverse society, we need to become acutely aware of the ways in which the dominant culture approach and perspective exert a powerful and often invisible influence both within the classroom and across the wider community. We must explore how the dominant cultures has shaped the Canada we now live in. At the system level, we need to identify and examine biases about what is valued, where power lies, where voices are present, and whose voices we need to hear. We further need to identify and address the systemic barriers that stand in a way of change and improvement. In the classroom, we need to be mindful of the experiences of students so that we teach in a way that genuinely resonates and reflects their backgrounds and identities. I just wanted to share this as an example. We have, I think, 90 or 80 some people on this call right now hearing this sort of message, but when this kind of message is sent to an entire system, it's very powerful. And then when it's supported with resources and professional development, that sort of thing, it becomes even more impactful. So the next slide, please. So from a systems perspective, we wonder, does all of this PD on equity have impact? Will it reduce suspensions and expulsions in the end? And here is some teacher voice to show that we feel this work has been having impact. So I will ask if you can play this video. Hopefully it works. I know we were having trouble with this one earlier. So, oh, good.
Our students have been exposed to books, pictures, video clips, and stories similar to I Love My Hair before. This was not the first time that they had explored, heard, or seen books that empower diversity and support equity. We are constantly and intentionally seeking new mentor texts that are both exciting to us and to them. The aha moment was that you can't ever really predict what book will deeply speak to your students. This particular book, at that specific moment, resonated with the girls in our classroom in a way that we never could have imagined. It proved that representation matters, and we need to keep exposing our students to culturally diverse stories about characters that look, talk, and feel like them. As educators, we have a unique opportunity to present them with all different kinds of materials and texts in the hopes that 1 or 2 will stick with them the way that I Love My Hair has done for the girls in our classroom family.
I noticed a shift in my own thinking when a teacher reached out to me via Twitter after I posted about I Love My Hair. She said, "I saw your tweet about the book I Love My Hair, and honestly, I couldn't be happier for those girls. As a former student with weird or different hair, I just know how much it meant to those girls. I know we may not know each other, but from one teacher to another, this is just amazing." I was so appreciative that this teacher reached out to me to tell me this because it shows that something as simple as reading a book where children are seen can resonate so deeply and for so long. After reading this book to my class, there were 2 students who said things that really speak to this. One girl said, "It makes me feel warm because it talks about me and that makes me feel important." Another girl said, "It makes me feel like my hair is a real person." This just proves how important it is for us as educators to provide these opportunities to our students, where they can all be seen, heard, valued, and acknowledged within their classroom and among their peers.
So my biggest aha moment, I suppose there's many, but As a French immersion teacher, everyone is welcome in this classroom. And what I think we have to unlearn and retrain our brain is that every single person, whether culturally and linguistically diverse or not, brings something to the classroom that we are learning from. It's an exchange. So think of regular differentiation. We're making sure that we're personalizing learning plans for each and every student. That doesn't change when a student who is ELL comes into our classroom or comes into our French immersion classroom. They impart so much of their plurilingual, multilingual abilities that they exchange with the students in the French environment, and those connections that are happening consciously or subconsciously is guiding the inquiry and guiding that inclusivity and that identity piece in the classroom. Parents' engagement when they're home and thinking about the anxieties that come with learning French as a second language, feel rest assured in that, you know, what they have as cultural sovereignty or cultural uniqueness and authenticity is being celebrated, but not just celebrated, they're learning from it without even knowing.
In the month of November, our school was focusing on social justice. So we decided to bring in some guest readers. And my first instinct was to use people that are easily accessible. But this time we decided to expand the learning partnerships. So I invited Monte in, and she brought a book of her choice. And what amazed me was how engaged the students were right away. She sat down and the children were quiet and just amazed with her presence. She read the book Nelson Mandela and told the story and made some personal connections. I was in awe of how my students connected with her. I had some students that were usually disengaged, actually completely involved in the rich discussions. And it really made me realize that I need to be more intentional with making decisions with my planning to ensure that it's culturally responsive.
Thank you. So I was just sharing some teacher voice about some impact of this professional development for them and how they're changing their instruction practice to ensure that all students feel represented. So just to go into the chat box, as I was able to take a look. So yes, we absolutely know that some LGBTQ students do not feel safe in Catholic schools. We also have data that shows in all schools, but for sure, and that's what we're trying to do is address that so that they do feel more safe and represented in the school, so 100%. And that I should mention as well, in terms of data, we do have lots of data that we could measure some of our strategies against. We have school climate data with Lisa is a big, she's the one that lots of work for her that she has to organize that with our researchers, and that is mandatory by in every school board every second year. So we have lots of data where students will identify as in the LGBTQ community, or if they won't necessarily identify what race they identify with, but that they're, for example, visible minority. So we do have our own internal data that we can use, and there's questions in there. Do I feel safe in my school? There's a whole bunch of very specific questions. So we use that data internally to determine whether our strategies are working, not working, where gaps do we have, where do we need to go next, that sort of thing. So we absolutely do have our own data, but every province, every school board is mandated by 2023 to collect culturally identifiable data. And so we just haven't done that yet. We actually have our first draft in January that we're looking through these questions have been developed by our researchers. So the ministry has provided us with the framework, and now we've developed those questions. Every school board's had to do that. Some school boards have already done it, but all school boards are mandated to do it by 2023. We're exactly what you're saying here is how are we supposed to measure if we don't have that specific data? But we do have the school climate data to determine when students feel safe. Happy to say that I don't have the data in front of me. I didn't bring that data with me. That most, we do have a high number of students that feel safe, but for us, if 100% of students don't feel safe, we still have work to do. So that's the way we look at it. Like, great points. And the last slide here for now, and I'm in recognizing time, is I just wanted to mention that in summary, all of our learning at the Ottawa Catholic School Board is through this deep learning framework. So the Ottawa Catholic School Board has actually been recognized globally for our approach to teaching and learning using this learning stance. We feel that when educators use this approach, students are more engaged in school, less bored, are owners of their learning, and consequently, this leads to less school discipline. There are 4 elements to this framework. And if there are any teacher candidates watching and you're hoping to apply to the Ottawa Catholic School Board for a job, I would suggest that you know this framework very well, because it'll likely be an interview question, just saying. So, but there's 4 elements: learning partnerships, learning environments, learning digital, leveraging digital, and pedagogical practices. And then finally, at the center of that framework, you're going to see the 6 global competencies. And these are the skills that the workforce indicates, and I'm sure you've heard about them in many of your studies, that students need to have to be able to be in the workforce. So collaboration, creativity, communication, critical thinking, character, and citizenship. So looking at the time, I had another Jamboard where we were going to go back and ask you, of those 3 pillars that we talked about, and I'm going to go back to slide 19. Alpha, if you can go back to slide 19. Of these 3 pillars, I was going to ask you, but maybe you can just reflect on it. Under which do you think is the most important to be able to move forward, that all students feel represented in our buildings? So leadership and human resources, school and classroom practices, or organizational structures and accountability. So essentially, we don't have time to go ask that question right now, but if you can reflect of those 3, what would you put more emphasis on? As you can see in the diagram, they're all interwoven and they all play a part. Some people might say the hiring practice, we have to increase diversity, and if you increase diversity, then we're going to be able to change the curriculum. Some people will say you start with the curriculum. Some people will say, oh no, you have to change the entire organization to remove systemic barriers. There's a lot of different entry points here, but they do all connect. So it depends on where you are, your own lived experiences, what you think you might feel the most important. We're just trying really hard to make sure we touch on all of them, and so that our students feel representative. So I'm going to stop talking, and if you want to ask us any questions, we're open to that, and you want to put them in the chat maybe. And otherwise, just thank you for inviting us here today.